Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the January 26th, 2023 Audit Committee meeting. Roll call, please.
Committee member Michael Bain.
Here.
Ed Kashadurian.
Here.
Jack Mavian is absent. Alex Parajon.
Here.
And Chair Zaria Mirian.
Present. Next item, please.
Item number 2, business agenda, Part A, report of recording secretary regarding posting of agenda. The agenda for the January 26, 2023 Audit Committee meeting was posted on January 23, 2023 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Excellent, thank you. Next item.
Item number 3, oral communications. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 3 minutes. The committee may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. The Audit Committee Chair may refer the matter to staff for investigation and report.
I do not have any cards. Do we have any phone calls? Okay, let's move on to the next item, please.
Item number 4, approval of minutes.
I move to approve the July 28, 22 meeting.
Minutes. Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second for the July 28th minutes. Roll call, please.
Committee member Michael Bain.
Approve.
Ed Kashadurian.
Yes.
Jack Mavian is absent. Alex Parajon.
Approve.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
may I just ask for some clarification? I'm looking at the minutes, and you're approving the July minutes, or are you approving the?
Okay, so we've got 2 sets of minutes. Thank you for your question. We've got 2 sets of minutes. We are approving the July 28th. July 28th, who was there at that meeting?
And in that regard, yeah,
Okay.
in that regard, the individuals who are still here and who were present would be Commissioners Khashadurian, Parajon, and yourself. And so with regard to that, we probably would get 1 abstention and then 3 approvals.
Excellent. I appreciate you catching that. So in that sense, let's go ahead and do the roll call again. Mr. Bain, in that case, you could abstain potentially.
Abstain.
I don't know that we need to do the roll call again. I think the record will just reflect that Mr. Bain abstained.
Excellent, excellent. And yes, I vote yes. So we've approved those minutes. Let's move on to the next set.
Item number 4B, minutes of the Audit Committee meeting held on October 27th, 2022.
I move to approve the Audit Committee meeting held on October 27th, 2022.
And those I will second.
Excellent. Roll call, please.
Committee member Michael Bain.
Approve.
Ed Kashadurian.
Abstain.
Jack Mavian is absent. Alex Parajon.
Approve.
And Chair Zaria Mirian.
Yes. Next item, please.
Item number 5, action items.
We have no items there, so let's move to number 6, please. At this point, what I'd like to do is I'd like to move, let's see here, is it 6B? Let's move 6B to first. So would you read that into the record, please?
Yes, item 6, reports and information. B, annual comprehensive financial report and report to the Audit Committee from Clifton Larson Allen LLP. Teresa Clark, Finance Accounting Manager.
Good afternoon, Chair Miriam and committee member. I'm here today to present the annual comprehensive financial report, or better known as ACFR, for fiscal year ending June 30, 2022. I will be also talking about the fiscal year end audit results, and then I'll be calling Daphne Munoz, engagement partner from Clifton Larson Allen, for her presentation. The city received an unmodified opinion. This is the best opinion that the city can receive from an external auditor. It means that we complied with the generally accepted accounting principles and all government accounting standards. No material weaknesses were noted. That means our check and balances are sufficient. And lastly, the auditors has no disagreement with management. The next slide is the statement of activities. This is similar to a net income statement in the private sector. The statement is broken down into two categories: government activities and business activities. The government activities are activities paid by taxes and grants. The biggest fund in this category would be general fund. We also have capital improvement funds, special revenue funds, and debt service. At the end of June 30, 2022, we posted a 67 million increase in its net position. The next category is business activities. Business activities are like an enterprise. These funds will cover their costs through user fees and charges for services. Examples of business activities are electric, water, and sewer. Business activities had a minimal change in the net position during the end of fiscal year 2021-2022. The city's net position is 1.7 billion at the end of June 30, 2022. Next, I wanted to call on Daphne Munoz, engagement partner from Clifton Larson Allen, to talk about the fiscal year and audit results in more details.
Welcome, Ms. Munoz.
Thank you. And good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Daphne Munoz, Engagement Principal from Clifton Larson Allen, and I'm here today to present to you the results of our audit for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2022. I am going to talk about the scope of our services, our auditor's opinion, our report on internal control over financial reporting, and lastly, I will talk about our communication with those charged with governance, which is required by our professional standards. So for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2022, we perform an audit of the financial statements, which covers a period July 1st, 2021 to June 30, 2022, in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards as well as government auditing standards. We're also performing a compliance audit in accordance with uniform guidance, and this is commonly referred to as the single audit, and this is because the city spent more than $750,000 in federal expenditures. We also perform and agreed upon procedures on the city's calculation of the appropriations limit, which is commonly referred to as the GAN limit. So for our auditor's opinion, the first paragraph again talks about the opinion and the period that it covers. As I mentioned, it covers July 1st, 2021 to June 30, 2022. As Ms. Clark mentioned, that we issued an unmodified opinion, which is the cleanest opinion, highest opinion any auditee can get. It means, in layman's term, it's a clean audit, that really the financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects in accordance with GAAP. The financial statements are the responsibility of the management, as well as adopting internal controls over financial reporting. Our responsibility as auditors is to express opinions on those financial statements. As part of our audit, we are required to obtain reasonable assurance on whether those financial statements are free of material misstatements. So those standards plan that we require that we plan and perform the audits to obtain that reasonable assurance. As part of our audit, we consider the city's controls over internal control over financial reporting as a basis for the audit procedures to make sure that they are appropriate for the purpose of expressing our opinion. However, we do not opine on the internal control over financial reporting. But as part of that review, if there's anything that we think requires the attention of those charged with governance, we will put it in the writing and issue a report. So we've issued a report, and in our report, there are no material weaknesses and there are no significant deficiencies or other comments. And lastly, our professional standards require us to communicate certain information. First is the plans of our timing of our audit was communicated during our planning meeting with management. Management is responsible for the selection and use of accounting policies, and those policies are disclosed in Note 1 to the financial statements. This year, the city had to implement GASB 87, which is the accounting on leases, and it changed the way the city presented and presented the leases in the financial statements. The financial statements include significant estimates for which actual results could vary what is reported in the financial statements. And just to highlight some of those material estimates are the required contributions, the pension expense, the net pension liability, and the related deferred inflows and outflow of resources for the CalPERS defined benefit pension plan are based on actuarial valuation provided by CalPERS. And for the PARS supplementary retirement plan are based on actuarial valuation by an outside consultant hired by the city. The OPEB expense and net OPEB liability and related deferred inflows and outflows of the resources for the OPEB plan are based on actual valuations performed by an outside consultant hired by the city. Same thing with the sick leave conversion related to the expense and liability related to the city's retiree health savings plan, again, are based on an actual valuation provided by an outside consultant hired by the city. The claims liabilities are based on an actual valuation. And lastly, the liabilities related to the landfill post-closure are based on estimates provided by the LA County Sanitation District. We did not have any difficulties during our audit. We did not have any disagreements that arose during the course of our audit. Management has provided us a representation letter dated November 18, 2022, and what's included in this letter is that management has represented to us that they have provided us all pertinent information related to our audit. And lastly, to our knowledge, the city did not consult with other auditors, and this is commonly referred to as opinion shopping. We didn't have any disagreement as far as any proper recording of transactions. So to our knowledge, there was no opinion shopping by the city management. That concludes my presentation. I will be glad to answer any of your questions.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up to questions from my fellow committee members.
Ms. Munoz, I have a
Mr.
quick...
Khashdurian.
Oh, thank you. I have a quick question, not necessarily related to the presentation. I was reading the report earlier this morning, and it crossed my mind that, you know, as an external auditor, you know that every year we go through a presentation during the budget season. You know, I'm assuming on our next meeting we'll be having that presentation. Are there any specific areas that you would recommend based on your expert opinion that we should focus more on so that it will help our work a little bit to understand like which sections of the budget or the financial presentation are more pertinent to the type of work that you're doing or the oversight, if any, we can offer to the city?
So with regards to the financial reporting, the really thing that's pertinent to the financial reporting is the compliance with the appropriations. Like that's what the budget is, what the objective of the budget, to make sure that the city are within our spending, that all expenditures are within the properly appropriated, that are properly budgeted for and authorized by the council. Other than that, it really depends on what the committee or the council are looking for as far as for budget presentation. But for us, and also for our financial reporting purposes, that's what we are concerned of, is make sure that the expenses do not exceed appropriations that were approved or authorized, or if it exceeded, that there was a proper amendment of the budget.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, so that normally that would happen in the case of, let's say, the estimates that you talked about, the significant estimates, for example? Is that when that would occur?
No, the estimates are really just the recording, or like, let's say for the net pension liability, right? So the valuation of the net pension liability are based on estimates that are based on actuarial valuation. What I'm talking about is really the actual expenditures that the city, because we also looked at as part of our audit, we make sure that that there is enough budget for every expenditure, and then we are actually required to disclose in the financial statements if actual expenditures exceeded budget.
Okay.
Which in the case of net pension liability, it's really hard to budget that. So that actually could really vary from what was budgeted, and really there's no way for for the management to determine what would be the actual pension expense, and there's just no time to amend the budget for that.
Got it. And so when is that true up then? When do you make that? So I would imagine then at the end of the year, there's, a UAL, and then that is pushed to the next budget year, basically?
Yeah, I think for budgeting purposes, really what the city budgets is what is the required contribution, which is more on a cash basis, because the net pension liability only really hits the government wide, and the budgeting purpose is more for the general fund. So for fund purposes, what is budgeted for, because that is what the city have the data for, is the annual required contribution, and that the city has the information, I think, about 2 years in advance.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Mr. Parham?
I have a question. So in regards to the audit you performed, was your budgeted hours spent on it in line to what was planned, or did you guys go over?
No, I think for the city of Glendale, it is within the normal course of our audit, yeah.
Was there an area where you spent more time in than normal?
This year, we spent more time on GASB 87. Depending on the year, we do look at different risk area because we have to do some certain unpredictability, so we test different areas every year.
GASB 87,
That is the leases. So that actually really did require a lot of manpower both on the city side and actually on our staff. I think, well, it's new, so we actually spent about, I believe my staff spent about 2.5 days to look at I would say though, actually your internal audit department and your finance department did a really good job on doing the documentation of their implementation of GASB 87.
Great.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Bain.
Did the implementation of GASB 87 have any significant impact on budgeting?
Not on budgeting, because actually GASB, the implementation of 87 is more of a, especially on the fund statements, it's a balance sheet item.
Okay.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, let's move on to item 6A, please.
Item 6A, Internal Audit Activity Report as of December 31st, 2022. Jesse Jong, Internal Audit Manager.
Ms. Shang.
Yeah, got it. Not mic now, I'm sorry. Repeat. I would like to start
Let's
with,
just start that all over again.
okay.
Ms. Shang, go
Good
ahead.
afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. This afternoon, I would like to provide you a report on the internal audit activities for the quarter ended December 31st, 2022. So as usual, I will go over all the 7 sections outlined at the beginning of the report. This report has been uploaded to your iPads, and so you can follow along. The first section covers projects completed during this past quarter. We have prepared 2 PowerPoint presentations for you. The first one is a contract compliance audit on the city's tree trimming contract. And this audit was actually completed by our former senior internal auditor, Samuel Salim, but he left the city last year. And I will be doing the presentation today. So let's see how this thing works. So let me move this next. So I would like to start the presentation by showing you a screenshot from the Arbor Access Tree Inventory System. This is kind of Samuel's idea too. It provides a very high-level overview on where the trees are located within the city. It's a good visual of Glendale's urban forest. So next, I would like to provide a brief background related to the city's tree trimming operations by answering a few basic questions. First, why is tree trimming important? This is an easy one. I think we all know that routine tree maintenance is crucial to reduce the risk of potential liabilities caused by fallen limbs, including causing injury, property damage, and power outage. So, So the next question is who is responsible to maintain these trees? So of course, the ones we're talking about in this report is city trees. So the city is responsible for the maintenance, and the city is doing so in the combination of using in-house crew and outsourced contractor crews. So next question, how many city trees are subject to routine maintenance? So at the time of our audit, there were over 48,000 trees that are subject to maintenance by the city. And the next is, what is the city's tree maintenance goal? So the frequency goal is to trim each broadleaf tree once every 6 years and each palm tree annually. So that's the basic maintenance goal for the city. And then the next question is, so how much is the tree maintenance contract cost? So here we're talking about the outsourced portion of it, not the entire maintenance operation. So the contract cost is for 6 years, not to exceed 7 million, a little change, a little bit over $7 million. So now we get all these basic questions answered. Next, I would like to provide a highlight on a few key contract terms that are more relevant to the audit findings. So per the agreement, the contractor is required to prepare a written annual maintenance plan, or it's a calendar that should specify all the major maintenance tasks per the agreement and the months they are scheduled to be performed. The contractor is also required to provide and operate a tree inventory system at no additional cost to the city. And this database should be updated regularly, and all the necessary updates should be made according to the field records. And the contractor is required to submit the invoices to the city for the services performed once a month. And then the tree trimming activities are in the invoice, the services should be billed itemized based on each tree serviced. And generally, these are billed at a fixed price per DBH. So are we ready for a pop quiz? What is a DBH? Anyone knows? All right, we'll go over them. So DBH means diameter at breast height. So this diagram basically illustrates how the DBH to be determined. So it's basically we take, or the foresters or arborists will take the circumference of the tree trunk from above 4.5 feet from the ground. And then the calculation of the DBH is basically to find the diameter, and this is done by divide the circumference by pi. So use this as an example. The circumference is 41 inches, and divide by 3.14. That gives us about 13. So that will 13 inch. So that will be the DBH in this case. And the city's tree maintenance is billed based on the size of the tree. Hi, Jack. So according to the city's contract, to prune this tree will cost us $165. So, a little fun fact about this. All right. So this next slide, I would like to just provide a quick overview of the overall tree maintenance process. So it starts with the city arborist is currently responsible for making tree trimming related work assignment, and the city arborist use the Arbor access system where that map was copied from to determine which trees are due for service. And then within the Arbor access system, a list is created. It's literally called a list. It's basically a job assignment list. And then this list will be routed within the system through the workflow to the contractor. And then the contractor will perform the field work, doing the maintenance, trim the trees. And once the work is completed, the information will be updated in the Arbor access system, and then a itemized invoice will be generated, and then the city will pay the invoice. So that's a quick overview of the tree trimming process. So for this audit, the audit objective is to determine whether contract provisions are properly followed and the contract is properly administered. And then the audit covers calendar year 2021. The audit procedures that Samuel performed included to interview the city and vendor personnel, reviewed tree trimming contract for the key provisions, conducted detailed testing of sample invoices, performed data analytics on the tree inventory data, and he tested compliance on the tree trimming frequency goals, and then conducted site visits and validated tree records against the Arbor access system on a sample basis. So in summary, based on the audit procedures performed, we found that the vendor is generally fulfilling its contractual obligation. We identified 7 improvement opportunities in the following areas: data quality, work histories, qualifying tree services, annual maintenance plan, system functionalities, access controls, and billing frequency. So the last 2 of the 7 areas have already been implemented. So the users that should not have access to the Arbor access system any longer have been removed from the system. And we also recommended to set up some controls, routine, notify the vendor when employee leaves, and then to have vendors set send user list to the city, so then, in the future, the user do not need access can be removed in a more timely manner. And then the billing frequency, we were billed by the contractor on a, twice a month, but the contract calls for once a month billing. So this has already been corrected and in December. So in the next few slides, I will provide a little bit more detail on the first 5 observations. So observation number 1 is related to data quality. So as noted in the report, there are many data inconsistencies. If you see the observation number 1, there's a whole long bullets of things. So for example, trees with good or fair condition have to be removed, recommendation noted in the system. So, that's obviously, you don't want to remove a good condition tree. So that's just an example of the many inconsistencies we noted. So the recommendations include first, to review these inconsistencies and make corrections as necessary. And then going forward, establish some input controls. So there should be some logic building in the system. If you enter good condition under condition, the recommended data field should not allow to be removed as the value for that data field. So, and then lastly, we recommended some periodic QC process. So, it's not everything can be controlled at input stage. And as long as you have human beings entering the data, there will be errors. So use the same example, a QC report will be, query the system for all the records with good condition and a recommended field with to be removed. So then you should see no records of that. And if you see any records, then you should be sent to a proper staff for follow-up and making corrections to the data. So the next observation is related to work history or missing work history. So what Samuel found was that about over 6,000 trees, there were no work history for these trees. So additional inquiries and the additional researches were conducted, and the 2 possible reasons were noted. So about half of these 6,000 trees were actually maintained by the city's community services and the parks department, and they didn't keep the work history. And these trees were added to the Arbor access system not long ago. So then they, that's why they don't have work history for these trees. And the other half, Samuel worked with the city staff and identified a potential reason is due to whenever we make changes to the tree, to the address of the tree. So by adding a direction, say, like add a north or east of that address, and then the work history associated with the address will be dropped. So it, because it's a different address, the system see a different address. So in this case, the work history should still in the system somewhere. It's just not linked to the right tree location. So we recommend that management determine the appropriate action for the trees without work history, and then to determine the reasons or confirm the reasons for the ones that got unlinked and update the database accordingly. Observation number 3 is related to qualifying tree services. This is a term that only, it's not a tree trimming industry terminology, it's just used in the report to differentiate between qualifying tree service, meaning it's the routine maintenance tree services, the trimming, pruning, and then the non-qualifying tree services would be services such as soil injection or trunk spray, stuff like that. So in this case, we found a few hundred of these trees do not have any qualifying tree service history, but they should. So then the recommendation is to determine the reasons for the missing services and either perform the service or update the records accordingly. The next observation, this is kind of mentioned it earlier. According to the agreement, the contractor is required to prepare an annual maintenance plan for the city, but currently the city is not using this service and we're doing the planning. So we recommend the city consider determining if it's beneficial for the vendor to submit the annual maintenance plan and also create the job assignment list, and then for the city to review and approve prior to the vendor commencing the work. So I think they're going to start to do it in June. That's the latest update. So the observation number 5 is related to the job assignment list. This is a little bit technical because it's related to the Arbor access system functionality. Basically, earlier I mentioned the invoices are itemized, and then, but however, the list is not referenced in the invoice, so it's difficult for the city to determine if all the services billed are actually approved by the city through the list assignment. So we recommend that the vendor, the Public Works requests the vendor to add the list reference in the invoice and or enable the listing of the many lists be exported to Excel, so then we can do the match ourselves. So preferably add a list reference to the invoices. Let's see. I do have the PowerPoint, but we already talked about it, so we'll skip through this. And then this is billing frequency. We talked about this already. And then, so that concludes my presentation. I would like to take this opportunity to thank personnel from both the Public Works and our vendor, West Coast Arborists, for their assistance throughout the project. And I would also like to thank our former senior internal auditor, Samil Salim, for his hard work on this audit. And with us today, we have representative from department, Mr. Lauren Click. He's the city's arborist, and he is our main contact for this audit. So then he and I are here to answer any questions you may have.
Excellent, thank you. Can we have the record just reflect that Mr. Mavian walked in 2:29? Thank you, appreciate it. Welcome. Thank you. And I'll open it up to questions from committee members.
I have a question.
Mr. Parhon.
Do you have any, because that $1 million in the, on this contract for the trees, but do we have a value of the liability that we have seen in the city in the past several years as to how much we're spending on or it hit a car, for example, a tree fell and it damaged, so forth. So trying to figure out, is there a value there as to determining if we have the proper system in place that is not increasing the liability of the city. It's actually, by what we're doing, actually decreases that liability.
Yeah, that's a good question. I kind of looked at Lauren, but I don't think we have that number right now. We can find that number for you, but then I want to say that those are historic data. I mean, the incident or accident happens, and it's not. It's like driven by weather, or just it can be a random event. So can be a good reference, but doesn't mean it's not going to, cannot predict what's going to happen in the future, right? So we can get that information to you. So do you let me just make sure I understand what exactly you're asking. The dollar, the trend of the accident?
Well, just how much we're spending on liability in regards to, accidents happening out there every year. Because
Caused by the tree.
Because, we have arborists that are going out there checking, the status of the trees, et cetera. And also the other question, actually, I do have after this one, but this one is more specifically is the $7 million we're spending, but how much are we actually spending in liability for repairing damages that are caused by branches falling, especially palm trees, because they're maintained every year per your report here. It tells me that those are more likely to cause more liability issues out there. So I'm assuming there's areas where maybe the city can look into and identifying, hey, this is a problem. Maybe we shouldn't have palm trees because we're paying more than what it's costing us to actually trim these on an annual basis. So just cost perspective from there.
And if I may, Mr. Parajon, just to make sure that we're not asking you to do something that is going to spend a lot of time and not give us an effective data. What I heard you say earlier in response was that because the accidents that may involve trees can occur and do occur largely as a result of weather phenomena or natural occurrences, it would be difficult for us to parse whether or not a tree branch falling was as a result of a lack of trimming or as a result of a gust of wind. Is that right? So
makes sense.
is that data would that even be helpful to us?
Yeah, I'm not sure we will have that specific. John, you have any insight on that?
I can maybe offer just a little bit of insight. Actually, we have Lauren Click up here who can speak to much of this. Specifically, I asked him to come up to address the issue of common issues. You brought up palm trees. Palm trees certainly are ones that we don't any longer look to install as a species of choice. There's other species that we've strayed away from. I'm not even going to attempt to try to be an arborist right now. As soon as he talks about it, it's going to come to me. But there's a number of species we just don't put in public right-of-way. Ficus is a great example, very invasive root system. It causes quite a bit of damage to sidewalks and to the asphalt. The carob trees are the ones I was thinking of, where from the outside they look perfectly fine and healthy, but they usually were ones that were rotting from the inside, and they would drop limbs without any warning. So with that, that's as far as my arborist skills go. I could just turn it over to Lauren to kind of address some of the more specifics.
It's on. All right, it's on. Committee Chair, members of the committee, my name is Lauren Click. I am located within Public Works, although, as Jesse mentioned, the city trees that we supervise and maintain, those encompass parks, encompass trees on any public property owned by the city. To speak to a couple of the questions that you asked, Committee Member Parajon. So there's a couple of industry standards within arboriculture in terms of determining the benefits of trees. Those are based on the condition of a tree. Those were sort of the good, fair ratings that were referenced before. There's also characteristics such as the size, the shade potential, the location. Is it in a good location for that tree? So obviously a tree in a big parkway without power lines above it, that's a really valuable tree for the city, as compared to, say, a palm tree underneath the power lines, because those are going to be the costlier trees that provide fewer benefits. And palm trees especially, that is a tree we're trying to move away from because the benefit just isn't there relative to the cost of maintenance. But of course, these trees, some of these palms have been here since, gosh, the 30s earlier. And so it's just a matter of managing that transition from some of those trees that cost more for the city to maintain rather than the ones that provide the most benefit. The term that we've been using a lot lately in the industry for the last 10 years is the right tree in the right place. So that's making sure that when we plant a tree, the idea is to get the most bang for the city's buck, the most benefit for the community that it's around. So we want to find trees that are not expected to cause issues in the future in terms of the space available. So sometimes that's a smaller tree, sometimes that's a larger tree, because again, these are trees maintained mostly on a 6-year basis. And the intent there is to ensure that city arborists within that 6-year period are inspecting the trees for potential hazards, potential issues with adjacent property, clearance from our right-of-ways, and then performing the necessary services. So sometimes that's major pruning, sometimes that's very little pruning, and that's sort of within that time period. So to answer your other question about in terms of liabilities, I understand that something that the city attorney's office looks at is have we maintained these trees within that 6-year period, and what type of maintenance was performed, how far away from that maintenance period did we get outside of, if that's the case, or if not, what kind of services were performed.
You just to follow up, now that you're kind of talking this through and I'm thinking it out. So is part of a tree's record whether it's been involved in a liability-inducing accident? Is that?
Yeah, Committee Chair, it is to a degree. Within our Arbor Access inventory system, we will register if there was a downed limb within that, because that's a specific instance that we then go and address. So then our next record on that tree record should be tree assessment or some type of pruning and a tree assessment. And then within our internal tracking, if we get a call from that, of course, that's logged through our other inventory, or our customer service database. So then you can reference, okay, we had, say, a downed limb at this address, and then you can check the customer service calls for that. The same is true for when people strike our trees with vehicles, for example. We'll get a call for a city tree struck by a car, and then that's another line within our Arbor Access system, which is not a qualifying tree service. So that wouldn't count like maintenance every 6 years. That would be outside of that norm.
Right. Mr. Parahan?
I still have additional questions here.
Go for it.
The other question I had was, how are the trees identified? Is there like a barcode or something that someone goes and scans it and identifies what's happening with that tree from the arborist perspective?
Committee Member Parajon, I wish. That's certainly a goal of ours, to have a publicly accessible idea of what trees are specifically planted across the city. The idea behind that, and some cities do this, is, for example, in Glendale, we have a designated street tree list. So that means every street, there's a couple of species within that street. But the idea in the future would be able to, the near-term future would be have that list publicly accessible. So if somebody's interested in knowing what trees on their street, they could look at that list, see, okay, it's one of these 3. And then in the future, having digital access to the tree species and being able to see the specific one. That's an ultimate goal, but that's a long-term goal.
Lauren, I believe the question was, how do our arborists identify the trees? And I think that's the GPS.
Right. Yeah, I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question, but that's correct, GPS. And so each tree has a specific, it has the address, it has a specific GPS point, as well as an identifier. So if this is the first tree in front of that address, or the second tree, and those follow a consistent process. So we know, okay, this is tree in front of the house, tree number 2, because it's to the right of the first tree. So it's a very specific sort of three levels.
And the final question I have, sorry to delay this longer, but part of the $7 million that we're spending on the service, are those the same contractors that also clear power lines and behind people's properties?
I understand they have a contract with GWP currently, but that's administered separately. I don't have any role in their work there.
The reason I was asking there is more like, is there a fee for those, citizens of Glendale that get charged for trimming their trees that technically belongs to them, that should have been billed to the citizen instead of the city being responsible for clearing it?
No, since we have controls and it's inventoried, so the public trees, those are controlled and, as far as I understand, billed to the city. But the city administers that line clearance contract entirely. So unfortunately, I can't speak to the specifics once it goes onto the private property.
So, and just a follow-up. So when the fire department goes around and looks at a house and then says, your palm tree needs trimming, do they do the same thing for the city's trees as well?
Yeah, Committee Chair, that's correct.
Okay.
We're in frequent contact with our friends over at Fire, and they'll say, we sent an abatement notice. It turns out this is a city tree. Please clear it, and we'll do so. Or they might say they're saying this is a city tree. Let's go talk to our engineering department and determine actual ownership.
Excellent. I'm learning something new every day. Yes, Mr. Tatalian.
I'll just add to what Lauren just explained. There's actually 3 different ways, at a minimum, in which these can be identified. First, it could be from the fire department. Second, it's part of the annual reviews and investigations that our tree contractors do to make sure that we keep track of the health of all our various trees. The third is the regulatory requirements on behalf of GWP. We do have a mandate, a requirement that we perform line clearance on an annual basis, and that line clearance can only be done by certain contractors who are qualified and trained and certified to be able to do that. West Coast Arborist is the firm that we use. Coincidentally, West Coast Arborist is, I believe, the firm that Public Works uses as well. And we made sure that we put it out there and tried to take a look at benefiting from economies of scale in the timing of both of those RFPs. Or bids, I should say. It was an RFP, it was a bid.
No further question?
Thank you, Mr. Parhon. Any other questions from my fellow committee members?
Mr. Chair, I have
Yes,
a
Mr.
question.
Khajadurian.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Click, and thank you for the presentation. There was a reference to, one of the, I think, last items on the presentation in regards to providing references to invoices. Did I get, okay. So if currently I'm assuming that there are no references provided when the vendor provides the invoice, so is there a verification process in place for somebody at your department, maybe, just to check to see whether or not the work has been done? And admittedly, this is a really difficult job. You're maintaining 50,000, was it? Like close to 50,000 trees a year?
12,000 a year.
Okay, that's still, I would just say it's a really difficult job. But could you maybe walk us through the verification process so that, if the invoice has been submitted, the department knows that actually that tree has been trimmed or pruned?
Yeah, Committee Chair, Committee Member Khajadurian. So the reference to the specific tracking within that system, or the list reference rather, so the city, the first level of control is the city actually sends all the work over to the contractor, and that's inclusive of the size for the diameter at breast height. So we actually measure the trees and tell the contractor we expect to be billed this amount. And we actually don't use math. We have a nice tool that you can put around the tree, so that's helpful for us. And so we put that on our list, and then we can cross-reference that. And if that's different, sometimes these trees have been maintained for 6 years. They will have grown. Sometimes it puts it up into that next size class. So that would be in the case of some trees where we aren't measuring them, and we send them off to the contractor. Say in an example where we're going to prune every tree at City Hall, then we go and look at the changes from the last time we pruned these trees to now, and those are the trees that would be flagged for our internal review. And since the invoice has the specific tree address, the species of the tree, the specific location of that tree, that's what I mentioned before, such as front 1, front 2, for example, we'd be able to pull up all the trees at that address and be able to cross-reference that quite quickly. So in terms of our internal review, a lot of times we have staff out there with the contractor when they're performing this work. Because we do have standards for tree trimming. There's plenty of work that occurs in the city, not by our contractor or arborist, that isn't up to the standard of the international standards set by the arboriculture industry. Or, of course, we copied those for our contract. And so if we see work that we feel might become deficient, or if we see work that is deficient, we're able to stop the contractor before it becomes something, something that we have to go and correct after the fact. An example might be planting a tree. If we see them planting a tree not where we've specifically asked them to plant it, or it's the wrong tree species, things of that nature. And then after the fact, we do spot audits for the actual lists that we receive. So we'll go out and, for example, the groupings are by that diameter size. So all the lists together will be grouped by the size class. So what we can do with our current functionality is at least export that to a map. So we can pull it up on a map, see all those points, see where the contractor worked, and then select areas from there to go out and inspect, measure trees, make sure the work is sufficient to the contract standard.
Thank you. That answers my first question. I have not a follow-up question, but a second question. I think earlier Ms. Zhang mentioned that out of the 50,000 trees, a portion is like done internally, right? Like I'm assuming the trees that we have in the parks, the park department maintains those, I'm guessing. Is there any like a specific division of labor so that we know what part of the job is outsourced? Or is it the difficulty of the job? Like what are the criteria or the criterion based on which you would just make that division? Would you be able to give us like a rough estimate of percentage-wise what % is outsourced and what % is done internally? Thank you. That's my second question.
So I'll start with answering that there's a couple programs that we outsource entirely. So palm tree pruning, for example, all 200-some thousand of those trees, not 1,000, I'm sorry, 2,000 of those trees, those are outsourced to the contractor because we have the equipment to do that work, but it is very time consuming. And of course, a lot of times in those instances, you need to close the entire road. We do have a small staff, so we want to make sure it's the value for our staff to be able to perform multiple requests rather than those bulk where we close down a street, perform service on every tree. The other program we outsource entirely to the contractor are those 6-year maintenance cycle maintenance prunes. And so by way of an example, we have 12 maintenance districts within the city of Glendale. We attempt to do 2 on average each year. And that's that 12,000 trees pruned annually number. And so those are their jobs we would outsource in their entirety, in which case the contractor has a list with every tree within that district that's owned by the city, and then they go and order along streets and go perform that work. The other program that we have that's a major program is our young tree maintenance program. And so in that case, that's every tree that's either just planted or under 5 years old. And those we have city staff only perform that work. I think our rationale for that is we've got arborists that are trained on our standards. The first 5 years are really important in the tree's life in terms of creating that structure for the long term. And we like doing that in-house. It's a good training method. It's a good way to save the city some money since those trees are costlier for the vendor to perform than they are for us to do that work. In terms of a general percentage, I would say it's probably, it's hard to estimate the percentage unless...
80, 20.
Thank you.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Khashadurian. Any other questions from my fellow committee members? I have a couple questions. So this approximately 12,000 a year number, and when we see in the report that approximately half of the palm trees, which are a large percentage of that, about 45% of that number, only half of the palm trees are on schedule. So that means roughly 20% plus of the trees that are supposed to be maintained have not been maintained. Am I right there?
Committee Chair, there's a bit of nuance in that number with palm trees specifically.
Okay.
So we moved to a 1-year cycle, I believe, in 2017, 2018. Previously, it was set at a 3-year cycle, and that was more of a result of the interests of the residents of Glendale. Palm tree palm fronds, they fall quite frequently. You can't use them as green waste, they're trash. Unfortunately, we have to use them as trash. And so what the city's method of maintaining a large number of palm trees, as you can see there, is we look at which palm trees are located within high traffic areas, city blocks which have the majority of their canopy as palm trees, and those are first assigned to that 1-year cycle. The remainder of those palms are assigned to a 3-year cycle, which was the previous cycle. So that means that generally we would prune those trees once every 3 years. Of course, the only change in that is if a resident requests a service, we'd go out and we'd assess it, we would put it on our maintenance list and prune it. There's another I suppose, aspect to this as well. Our contract specifically calls out palm trees, which are underneath power lines, and we ask our contractor to not prune those until they obtain permission from us, because those trees cannot live there permanently. GWP is going to have to kill those trees because palm trees can't be directed away from lines, they just go straight up. And so for those trees, we're not going to perform any services through our contractor on those. That would just be, we'd go and prune off the fronds within our city crew until such point that GWP finds that they have to work with the forces that be to go forward for that removal.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that context. My other question is more of a question for management and in terms of how, audit is leveraged, and like this report, I don't know if I've ever asked this question in this way directly. I mean, considering the number of hours that were spent on this particular audit, when management looks at the results of this audit, for example, how do they, how do you use this information in terms of leveraging it for your uses? Are there concerns that come up for you when you look at some of these numbers, and then do you communicate that with the vendor? A significant number of hours were spent on this particular audit. So I'm wondering how that kind of cost benefit works in terms of management's side, in terms of leveraging audit's time. That was a little bit of a large question and meandering, but if you...
Short answer.
Yeah, excellent, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, we do leverage it, in all honesty. And I don't want to put Lauren on the spot and ask what the result of this audit has been, but I can tell you that internally before the audit committee meeting, we go through this with the department specifically, including myself, the city manager, the department director, as well as the auditors who performed it. And part of it is us also discovering what some of the deficiencies may be. Fact is, if we knew that they existed, the audits would be perfect. That's why we have continuous auditing and this function to begin with. Our internal audit operation is truly intended as to be a tool for our internal use, not as a gotcha. That's not what it was developed for. That's not why we're here. So I will say that based on every one of these, they go on a list and we continue to follow up. Actually, it's Jesse who continues to follow up. And from time to time, we have to bring back to this committee what the status of those follow-ups are. Was this remedied? Was there a change made? If not, why? And we can't make changes in every instance. An audit might find a best practice or what might seem like a best practice that's just not practical or not practically affordable. And those are realities we have to deal with. Ultimately, we have to come back and explain why we couldn't do something. These are much more simple. These are deficiencies. These are areas where now we're aware of it. We go back and we work with the contractors to remedy it.
Yeah, and I appreciate that perspective, because these are opportunities for learning that moving forward will make things more efficient, and, hopefully, 6 or 10 years from now, when the next tree trimming audit happens, that less of these issues come up. And I appreciate that perspective, because it is sometimes, we sometimes catch these numbers and we're like, wait, what? And the reality is $7 million is a lot of money, but it's $7 million over 6 years. And so the reality is, even the numbers where we see them reported, where there's 2,500 palm trees that are off of schedule, have some nuance. There are variables that come into play. And so I'm happy to hear that management is, I knew it already. It's better for us to hear it and the public to understand that this is the results of these audits aren't just, oh, you didn't get these trees? Like, let's come after you. The results of the audit are, how do we make our practices better? What are some of the tools that we can use or implement that will ensure that it's more efficient in the future? What are some learnings that we can carry over from the findings in this particular audit to other departments or within the same department that does similar work through third-party vendors? So I appreciate that. Okay, let's move on. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have
Oh,
another.
yes, Mr. Khachaturian.
I apologize. Just a quick question, maybe, okay.
You almost escaped. You were almost done.
This is really a quick question. So are we talking about a single vendor, or for the 6 years you sign a contract, or there are like different vendors providing different parts of the work? I'm assuming, for a 6-year period.
Correct, it's one vendor for the 6 years.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Excellent, thank you. Let's move on to the next one.
Hold on. Let me find it. So the second presentation we have prepared for you today is the fleet vendor management audit. And Natalie is already ready to go. Let me start the slideshow. Right.
Ms. Manami Valdivia.
Good afternoon, Chair Marion and fellow Audit Committee members. My name is Natalie Manami Valdivia, and I'm a Senior Internal Auditor within the Internal Audit Division. I'm pleased to be able to present to you the results of the Fleet Vendor Management Audit that was completed this past quarter. So just to provide you with a little bit of background, the vendor management process is administered by Fleet Services. And Fleet Services is one of 8 divisions within the Public Works Department. The Fleet Vendor Management Division responsibilities include they're responsible for the city's vehicle and equipment maintenance and automotive warehouse facilities. So for our city, there are 4 separate garages. There's one in Glendale Water and Power, a second one in Public Works, the third one in fire, and the last one in police facilities. The objective of this audit was to determine if fleet vendors are properly managed and follow the city's policies and vendor management best practices. The scope of this audit included goods and services received for the fiscal year 2022. In order to accomplish our objectives, we performed the following procedures. We reviewed agreements, policies, and other information that included contracts and purchase orders, the Fleet Inventory Management Guide, the Faster User Access Controls Policy, and the city's purchasing policy. We interviewed Public Works fleet, finance, and information technology personnel, and then we conducted detailed test work on a sample of inventory items and fleet vendors. Based on our walkthrough of the fleet vendor management process, we identified that this process begins with fleet identifying the goods and services that will be needed and submitting these items in a purchase requisition. That includes listing each specific item to be included within the request for quote, as well as an estimate of the annual quantity that will be needed. And because it's not possible to anticipate 100% of the items that will be needed, the contracts also have a portion that allows specific vendors or specific categories to be included so that the vendors can provide a discounted percentage based on manufacturer's list price. So then once the purchase requisition is created and we request quotes and receive those quotes, and a contract and a purchase order is established with a vendor. So once that's done, Fleet will order its goods and services, and track PO remaining balances and receive goods and services. And then the final step would be processing the invoices for payment. So as a result of our audit, we identified 8 improvement opportunities related to the following 4 general categories. So there's the policies and procedures, the faster system, purchase orders and contracts, and invoice review. So let me start off with the first category, which is policies and procedures. And this particular category had 2 observations related to 2 policies. One, the Fleet Inventory Management Guide, and the Faster User Access Controls Policy. So for the first one, the Fleet Inventory Management Guide didn't have specific guidelines for personnel to carry out their vendor management responsibilities. So these included, for example, how to compile a listing of parts to be included in the purchase requisition. Also, how to compile or how to determine which vendors should be used to purchase a particular item, and then how to verify that the contracted price agrees to what was invoiced. The second one was related to the faster user access controls policy, and that, in this case, Public Works had a faster user accounts controls policy established, but what we found was that the fleet division didn't have a copy of it and wasn't aware that the policy existed. So our recommendations to fleet were, 1, to update the Fleet Inventory Management Guide to include all of the specific guidelines required to perform their vendor management responsibilities, and also to update and distribute the faster user access controls policy. So the second category is the faster system, and the faster system is Fleet's asset management system, and it's used to track purchase orders, initiate inventory purchases, receive inventory, record the inventory cost, and allocate the inventory and service cost to vehicles and equipment. Based upon our inquiries and detailed test work, we noted that there have been 5 faster asset management upgrades that have not yet been installed, and that would provide the city with additional operational functionalities. And this was partially due to a turnover in staff and the contacts not being updated with faster. And then in performing our routine user access controls testing, we identified that there were 5 separated employees that had active faster user accounts. But it should be noted that although they had active faster user accounts, we verified with IT that their Active Directory access had been disabled. The third is that the established role-based assignments were inconsistently granted. So our recommendations for this category were to update the contacts and install upgrades, to disable the faster user accounts for separated employees, and to periodically review and update the users and role-based accesses. So I want to give credit to Public Works. They were very proactive in implementing these recommendations. They have already contacted faster and updated the contacts, and they've reached out to the Information Technology Department, are in process of working with them to get the upgrades installed. They've disabled immediately once we identified the 5 separated employees. They immediately had them disabled, and they have actually requested and obtained or requested to be added to the email distribution list that HR sends out to that lists all the recently separated employees. So they'll make sure to that all separated employees are disabled upon receiving that list, and then. They've also gone through and they've reviewed the role-based accesses, and they made changes where they were appropriate. The third category was purchase order and contracts. So for this category, we had a few observations. The first one was that when we did our sample selection, we noted that 2 of the 5 contracts with negotiated price list items had purchases that estimated 11% of the annual estimated units. So as I mentioned before, when we submit a purchase requisition, we provide them with the items that we need and the estimated annual quantities. So in this case, there were 2 contracts that the items that we purchased were about 11% of what we estimated. So what that means is that there's a number of items that were purchased that were not included on the specific item listing. So as a result, when we did some additional test work, we noted that there are items that are purchased from multiple vendors. So what we saw based on our test work where there were 2 items that were purchased from 4 vendors. So just to give an example, there was a synthetic oil, and we purchased about 349 units or 350 units of this oil from 4 different vendors. So when this happens, there's a risk that the city doesn't purchase the item from the lowest cost vendor. So similarly, like I mentioned, there were 2 parts that were purchased from 4 vendors. We also had 9 parts purchased from 3 vendors, and then 165 parts that were purchased from 2 vendors. The second item was related to the contracts and the purchase order negotiated price listings were not consistently available in Munis or in a centrally located in a central location, and the location of those price lists hadn't been communicated to the applicable personnel. The third is that a complete list of all the contracted vendors and the negotiated parts and price lists hadn't been established. And then the fourth one is that we use multiple manual workbooks and systems to track our purchase order remaining balance. And by doing this, we enter invoice information multiple times, and then we have to reconcile between those different lists and systems. So our recommendations included that we analyze the routinely purchased items that should be included within the purchase requisitions, that we ensure that the contract and purchase orders are available in a central location and the location be communicated to staff, that we create a list of vendors with the parts and prices, and that we work with FASTER to determine the feasibility of entering all purchase orders and so that we can track purchase order remaining balances. The fourth and last category that we'll take a look at today is the invoice review. And for this category, the related observations were that the invoice prices are not traced and agreed to the contract negotiated prices. So as a result, based on our sample, the 5 contracts that we reviewed, they all had prices that didn't agree to the negotiated price list. And the second was that we had one vendor that invoiced shipping fees, and for this particular vendor, the shipping fees were negotiated within the contract price already, so shouldn't have been invoiced separately. And then the last was that we noted that there was one advance payment or a deposit placed, which is in violation of the city's purchasing policy. So our recommendations for this item included that we require that all invoices, all items within an invoice be agreed to the vendor negotiated price lists or the percentage discount from manufacturer price list, that we request the refunds for the shipping charges and make sure that if in the future that same vendor, that particular vendor lists shipping charges, that we take care of that at that time. And last, that we reiterate that their advance payments are not allowed. So that concludes my presentation. I'd like to take the time to acknowledge and thank the Public Works Fleet staff, Public Works and Public Works Fleet staff for their cooperation, as well as Finance and Information Technology throughout the duration of our audit. And so with that, we have the Assistant Director, Kevin Todd, Savada Hambasurian, John Chavez and Lala de Bergerosian here to answer, and myself, of course, to answer any questions that you might have.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to open it up to questions from my fellow committee members. Yes, Mr. Bain.
You commented on some of the people weren't removed from faster access when they were terminated. Can that system be accessed other than through your normal system that they have to be in? You mentioned they had been removed or locked out of the Active Directory. Does that mean they couldn't get to this system, or could they access this theoretically from another source?
Thank you very much for the question. Actually, because Active Directory was disabled, they do not have access to get into FASTER. So our recommendation is based on best practices, just to make sure that if Active Directory isn't disabled, we have disabled the individuals from the particular system, in this case, FASTER.
And a related question on FASTER, you said there were a number of upgrades that hadn't been installed. Are those included in your normal contract, or are those at extra cost to install?
So my understanding is that the upgrades are included. I think that the city or Public Works, in cooperation with IT, they are taking a look at moving the FASTER system to be cloud-based. So if to do just the upgrades that we were speaking of, I believe that those are included, but to move it to, if we choose to move it directly to the cloud, that there will be some additional costs incurred.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from my fellow committee members?
I have a question.
Mr. Khashadurian.
Thank you. So thank you so much for that report. Was very interesting for me. The question that I had goes back to a part of your presentation when you mentioned that you have come across to certain requisition or orders that have been placed, but like 4 or 5 vendors have provided that item during the year. And I think you mentioned that the issue was that you could not verify whether or not the least cost or the price was the best. Did I understand that statement correctly?
I believe, yes. So those items were not ones that were listed in the specific list items. So those were ones that, based on the manufacturer or based on the category type, they were granted or we were given a fixed percentage discount. So if we don't specify the product, then it's possible we can purchase it from multiple vendors. So when that happens, then there's a risk that we aren't getting the lowest price.
Okay. So this, I think, sort of a follow-up to this, and maybe I didn't really catch that part properly. Do we have a list of sort of approved vendors for specific items? And if we do they provide a price list, like a price list that is, with a guarantee that the price is going to stay the same for the entirety of the, let's say, 12 months, so that if you want to buy item A, that's the vendor that has the least price? And so is that how the process works usually, or?
Well, that was one of the recommendations that we made, because currently there is that requisition that goes out and the request for quote that comes back with a quote on each individual item. However, currently you would have to go to each vendor's contract and look at the supplied price listing. There isn't a compiled list of every single item that we've negotiated and where we would purchase that item from.
So there is such a list of approved vendors, right? So it's not, the process doesn't start from zero. You have a list of vendors that you go to. Like, for example, if we have a new vendor, is there a process of vetting them?
Hi, good afternoon, committee members. Chair, committee members, my name is Kevin Todd, Assistant Director of Public Works. I manage the Fleet Division. I think what you're getting to is our procurement process through purchasing, and we do bid out on a regular basis to get vendors that are dedicated to certain materials, and they could be an extensive list, or it could be something very specific, like just tires or just oil or something along those lines. I think what we're seeing here is a bit of an exception over the last couple of years where we've had supply line issues, availability issues with a lot of materials. In the case of oil, if we have or any part, if we have a piece of equipment in the shop being worked on and we go to order materials and they're not available through that vendor, they may not be available through that vendor for weeks. We'll go to another vendor that we have available that can get those materials. We can get that piece of equipment back into service.
Okay, so this other vendor, I guess a part of my question is that do you have an approved list of vendors?
We have approved vendors. Most often they have specific materials that we're supposed to buy from each vendor. But in the case of a vendor not being able to provide that material, we will often substitute another vendor to be able to do that for that instance.
So they will quote their price for that particular item?
We will buy the item for their price, not what was on our vendors list for the contracted price, and that'll be an exception.
I understand. Thank you.
But there are times, and what I hear you saying is what I suspected was happening, is there are times you go to the vendor that you always purchase the product from, and they say they're out of stock, and you need the oil, otherwise the trucks don't run. So you go to a different vendor. I'm curious, how many different people generally are placing these types of orders within the department?
John? I'll let you answer to that. I could tell you in the past year and a half, we've consolidated our fleet procurement operation to our warehouse. It was through each independent shop was doing all of their own procurement for their own stock and their own work that they were doing. In order to get a better handle on this and control this process, we've consolidated everything under a warehouse process where John Chavez is our warehouse supervisor.
Excellent. Welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Yeah,
Just
so
introduce yourself real quick.
my name is John Chavez. I'm a Public Works Fleet Supervisor for the warehouse.
Excellent. So I saw you kind of flash the answer. So there's 3 people that place these orders.
Correct.
Excellent. And so that we put a human face to these numbers and an understanding, those 3 people, are you one of those 3 people?
Correct.
Okay. So your job is to make sure that certain things, your job is to make sure that the trucks are able to run, basically.
That's right, yeah.
Right. So in the case of, let's say, the tires, for example, okay, you're determining, okay, I go to this is where I get the tires from. They don't have access to these tires. I have to go someplace else to get them. In the case where it was noted, for example, that there was a $200 variance, do you remember that specific circumstance?
I don't recall.
Okay.
During COVID, we went through a lot of those instances
I
where,
can imagine.
it was either like my boss said, keep the vehicle out of service or wait until this vendor has the tire back in stock. So I believe we made the right decision in keeping all the vehicles in service.
And just so that I understand from a culture standpoint, it's a big responsibility to have to place those orders for all of these different shops, I imagine, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you are balancing both being able to provide what those shops need in order to get the work done, along with your stewardship of the public's funds, correct?
Yes.
Good. Yeah. So, I mean, I know that that's being considered. It's nice to hear it, because you sometimes see these numbers and you're like, why did they make that decision? Mr. Tatayan.
Chair, Marion, members of the committee, I just wanted to clarify one thing if it wasn't made clear. Yes, we do have a list of vendors, but these aren't lists of vendors that are created by the Fleet Operations Department or Public Works in general. All those vendors that we have gone through a competitive bid process through our purchasing operation. We have open purchase orders with them. So it might very well be that the one vendor who we always anticipated to buy brake supplies from is out of something and they were the lowest bidder for the brake supplies. I don't know, Craig Auto Parts, for example. They don't have it. We may have a PO with Pep Boys where something over the same brake supplies might be 20% more. we're going to go to Pep Boys and purchase that. We're not going to go to my cousin's, parts store and purchase it for $200 more. My point is, any vendor that we work with has been vetted through and been a low bidder on some type of service that we put out. It just so happens that they sometimes have overlapping products.
And
a matter
if
of
your
getting the job
cousin
done.
has a parts store, you can just shout it out right
I
now.
don't.
No.
I made that part up, to be honest.
Excellent. And I appreciate that. More so, not to just put you on the spot, just to appreciate what happens in this kind of scenario with COVID, where there were a lot of supply chain issues. It's nice to kind of see that, we see these numbers sometimes in our imaginations are, there's just somebody going like, I'll take 6 of these, thank you very much, and they're not even paying attention to the price. But it's 3 people, and I assume that the other 2 are like-minded to you in terms of how they approach this.
Yeah, they're incredibly well-trained. I mean, they exercise great judgment, so I really don't question their decision-making when it comes to ordering parts. I know that they are customer-oriented, and they work with a sense of urgency, so I'm appreciative of the staff that I have.
Excellent. Thank you. Sorry to jump in there.
No problem.
Did you have any further questions?
Just another, I guess, follow-up to this. Is it possible for us to imagine that there's a part that you have 3 vendors in your list? Like, on that list, you have 3 vendors, each could potentially provide the part. So if there's a request, an order from a department where you need to purchase, how do you contact all 3 of them and ask, or you have a contractual price list, you just check and see which one will provide you with the lowest price, and then you don't even go to the other 2 because you already have the lowest price?
That's correct. So it depends on the vehicle and the specific part that we're looking for. So when it's heavy-duty vehicles, we have a specific vendor that provides us with the lowest price for heavy-duty parts. So we'll go to them first. In the event that they don't have it and they tell us it's a significant back order, then we start shopping around with everyone else.
And do they regularly update their price list, or is it like a once a year, or there's no telling?
It's really hard to tell. Natalie and I had a hard time getting with one of the vendors to provide us access to his price list. And one of them even said that, if you want it, you have to ask for it on a yearly basis.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very helpful. Thank you so much.
Any other questions from my fellow committee members? Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's move on.
So that concluded the presentation for today for the projects that we completed for the past quarter. Now I'm just going to go over the rest of the report, all the remaining sections. So the next section, I also have that report on the big screen so we can all follow along. So the next section is projects in progress currently. So we have 2 projects listed. One is a water system pipeline management contract audit. And this was started briefly by Samuel, and then now Natalie is taking over this project, and she already made some quite progress. So I hope we'll present the result of this audit to you soon. The next in progress project is the landfill JPA with sanitation district audit. And this one, the focus is not necessarily on the full contract compliance because we have a handful of years left. The focus is to making sure that the city is receiving the correct share of the revenue and the host fee. So hopefully both will be completed and presented to you at our April meeting. The next section is continuous auditing. So this past quarter, we had two projects completed. One is a procurement card usage with existing purchase orders. So this test was basically to identify the P card charges to vendors with existing POs that specifically exceeded 15,000 limit. So we have identified 13 P card transactions that were made to 8 vendors with existing POs. So then the exceptions and the recommendations were provided to the affected departments, and basically is to share the result with the actual cardholders and their approvers to remind them the policies, and then to make sure they know all the options that they have, rather than just use P cards.
May I ask a follow-up on that?
Okay.
So in those instances, how many of those transactions, when you went to the affected departments, did the affected departments go, yeah, we knew about them, but were those surprises?
I think most of them were.
Okay.
So it's a little bit hard to, I guess, monitor this one from the departmental side, because they have to monitor the PO as well as the purchase order expenditure, as well as the P card expenses. There isn't a clear report that shows both of them, because we've written a script to identify this. But as we're doing this continuous audit more, they are becoming more aware of it. When they reach, it's a cumulative limit, so it's not just when you use your P card, you're over it, but cumulatively, through whatever method of payment, you're over that amount.
Is there a way other than and obviously then that shows how valuable this is there a way that those departments would be able to recognize when that happens?
That's a good question. Actually, after a few rounds of testing, and we realized, from a couple of times, the department's feedback is we knew this rule, but it's not that easy for us to monitor the total amount when it's reaching 15,000 and not to use P card. So we're, I had a conversation with our Munis team, and to see if a report can be provided to the department so that they can see. We have a report. It's custom made by the Munis team for us to do this testing. And then I asked if a similar report can be provided to the department. So that was being considered.
And just so that I understand the mechanics of the procurement card. So explain the procurement card to me. Is it a credit card?
Yeah, it's like a credit card. And the only, is that a difference? I mean, it's not really different. Your credit card has limits too, right? So then in this case, the city's procurement cards has, every procurement card has 2 limits. One is a single transaction limit. One is the monthly limit.
And is this like a Visa or MasterCard or an American Express? I mean, is it literally like a credit card through one of the big banks? Yeah.
Visa.
Oh, it's a Visa. Okay.
Visa or Master? I don't remember.
Got
Yeah,
it.
one of, I don't have my purse.
It is one or the other. And the one thing that I would add to what Jesse just explained is, in addition to single purchase limits and monthly limits, we also have the ability, and we practice this, to manage merchant codes on the back end. So the cards can only be used for certain things. They can't be used for jewelry, alcohol, gasoline. In some cases, they can, if it's
Depending on the department. Yeah.
Certain departments, certain operations. But yes, it's not a here you go.
No, I understand that. I was thinking more of the sense of like alerts, like, if you're setting up a limit, is there a tool within which that you can have an alert that alerts you of a purchase over a certain amount? In this case, whatever the limit is.
This is not related to the when you actually using the card, the P card limit.
Yeah.
This is a limit of the total purchase to this PO. We have this rules of per vendor per year, not to exceed 15,000 limit. So then,
So if I may.
right.
Yes, Mr. Tahtaya.
So when we issue purchase orders through our purchasing department, they have dollar value limits. Purchase order is only good for these types of expenses, not to exceed 10, 15, 20, whatever the dollar amount is. I think what Jesse's describing is situations where perhaps a purchase order had run out of money, but there was still a need to make up a difference on this one last transaction and a credit card was used. It's not nefarious in terms of, kind of trying to, I guess you are trying to subvert that system, right? Because it's in excess of the purchase order. But because it was a credit card that was used as opposed to the city's Munis system catching a transaction in excess, it didn't get caught until the testing was done.
And it technically violates the purchasing
It
policy.
technically violates it.
Understood, understood. And that's, and that's what I'm trying to understand, wrap my brain around, is exactly kind of what these circumstances are. And obviously, look, the vast majority of these cases are going to be issues where it's exactly that. It's not a nefarious, like, someone's like, I'm going to get this passed. But understanding how it works also helps us understand how, and I imagine it helps you as audit and it helps management understand how it can be potentially abused, because there's a reason for the policy. And so finding out something, 2 months after the fact or 3 months after the fact is okay when it was necessary at the time, and you can explain to them why the purchasing policy exists and say, here are the options in the future. It's not great when you find out about it 3 months later and it was not something that should have happened at all. So I appreciate the clarification on that. Okay.
May I?
Yes.
Just to
Mr. Rob?
understand the P card a little bit more. So is this an actual credit card that accrues interest by a banking institution, or is this funding that's earmarked for this in like a kind of a secured account for the city of Glendale? And who would the controller be for that? So is somebody lending this money, and does it accrue interest, or is it a part of
Mr.
an account?
Tautaya.
Good question. I don't know the specific response to the technical aspects of it, but I can describe to you the typical way that it works. The individual credit cards are issued to the user. I can't lend mine. Mine has my name on it. It's for it has City of Glendale logo on it and everything. It's only used for city business. I can't lend mine to anybody else. Sorry, I don't mean to bring you into this.
Or your cousin.
Yeah, to my cousin, right? And if I did, that is a violation of city policy. We have very strict rules against this. When purchases are made on the credit card, we get a monthly statement. The monthly statement is reconciled by somebody in each department. It lists the date of the transaction, the purpose of the transaction, the account number it's going to be charged to, and then there's supporting documentation attached to it. That each of those are individual packets. They almost look similar to this. They go to the department manager, department head for review and approval. So there's a second set of eyes that take a look at it to ensure that what was purchased was valid and appropriate. And ultimately, once it's approved, it goes to the finance department for payment. So does it accrue interest? I suspect if finance doesn't pay the invoice on time, it does. But I don't know what the arrangement on the back end is for an institution of our size at this time.
I see. So I would imagine these are city funds allocated towards this purpose.
When you say, when you say accrue interest, is like the city, we don't pay on time?
No. I'm meaning when I have a credit card,
Yeah.
I have to pay, JP Morgan Chase interest for using that credit card. You know, is this a
If you don't
secure?
pay it within, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you don't pay it within the period, you know, whatever the period is. So, you know, the difference between a charge card, let's say, versus, you know, something that you have to pay every 28 days or whatever the case might be, versus, you know, carrying that balance.
Right.
I mean, I think that's probably a Mr. Bradford question, but you know, I'm sure he can answer it right away. So if we can just ask him, and by the way, I imagine also that that's reflected. Any type of interest would be reflected in any type of accounting that would be done at the city level anyway. So any type of interest carried would be a line item.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find wrap my head around. Is this a secured, I suppose, account through earmarked funds, or is this actually being lent from an institution? And we're paying on time, and you know, we're not accruing any interest. But who's the debtor in this
It's really a
case?
question of whether it's a credit card or a debit card.
Right. Precisely.
he's on.
Precisely. Yeah.
Or maybe a secured credit card, I think that's what you're trying to
Or a
say.
debit card. Yeah, that may. Yeah. Exactly.
I think it is a great question. It is. I am curious now. I imagine they're probably just credit cards.
Yeah. I mean, if you carry balance on your credit card, of course you have to pay interest on it, and it's very high interest rate too. I don't think we have that, and also I think because the amount of usage for the city's P card, we actually get incentive from the bank when we
Get the points.
similar to the points. We do get some money back actually.
Look,
for using
you're talking about a lot of money. All of that is going to be negotiated as well with whichever bank that the city banks with. So I imagine there's a lot of perks that go along with that. But I'm sure we'll get an answer to that. Let's go ahead and move on to the next item.
All right. So the next test we completed under this continuous auditing section is double dipping test. It's also PCAR related again. So this one is actually to identify if there are any incidents of employee expense reimbursement claims that is submitted by employee, and also that employee has a P card, and the charges is actually made by the city's P card. So we didn't see any instance of procurement charges included in the employee reimbursement claim.
Excellent.
So that concludes this section, and moving on to 4 and 5 and 6. Those are all related to quarterly follow-up. Like John mentioned earlier, we put a lot of effort into the following up on the recommendations, because we spent time and effort to write up those issues, and then we do want to make sure that management implement those recommendations in a timely manner. So section 4 is basically provide an overview on the status of the follow-up. So last quarter end, we had 41 outstanding items, and this past quarter, from these 2 audits completed, we added 15 items. So then that gave us 56 items total, and 3 have been implemented during this past quarter, and we have 53 items remain outstanding at the end of December. Section number 5 is priority 1 audit items. So this is the same 2 listed from last time. Progress has been made, but as I mentioned before a couple of times, this first one involves the school district, so it's a little bit out of our control. However, the MOU was drafted and it's being reviewed, so that's a good news. So I'm hoping the school will go forward with this project. And the next one is related to basically documenting policies and procedures. So it's, I guess the department have limited resources. We hear that, we feel that for the department, and now I'm like personally experiencing it. So it's tough when you, have short staff on these things. But I think Natalie has been working with the department to provide any assistance needed to help them complete this item. So fingers crossed for getting this done by the next quarter. Number 6 is the outstanding audit items meeting audit committee discussion criteria. So again, as John mentioned earlier, so what happens if department do not implement or delay the implementation? So we have this controls, this audit committee set up to make sure if any items fall into one of these 3 categories, then the department heads or the representatives from the department will be invited to the meeting and answer questions why it's not done. So these 3 conditions are if they decided within the 3-year period that they're not going to implement the recommendation. The second will be if the item has not been implemented for 2 years from the report issuance, then they need to come and say, okay, you have 1 year left, what's your plan? The third condition is 3 years after the report issuance, then we'll stop following up, because by that time it's a lot of things that probably have changed. So that's deemed not implemented, and again, they will be invited to here to explain the reasons behind that. So the last section of this report is advisory services that internal audit participated in the 3 teams. One is the Investment Policy Advisory Committee, PCI Compliance Team, and Energy Risk Management Committee. I want to highlight just the PCI team activity for this past quarter because in December is when the annual PCI compliance assessment was performed by the city's external QSA, qualified security assessor. So he was on site, and the internal auditors, all of us, had the opportunity to shadow that QSA. There are a total of almost like a 20+ site visits / meetings we participated. So this is so the city has passed this assessment. Basically, had an overall compliant rating. So this result is kind of reflected the effort of the entire PCI team, and it's also as part of that team, internal audits, quarterly audit of this area to help department be better prepared for the annual assessment. And it's also a good training opportunities for the auditors. While shadowing the QSA, we get a better understanding of his style and his expectation. So when we perform our audits, we can better help the department to be ready for the next year. With that, concludes my report for this quarter.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's move on to the next item, please.
Item number 7, Audit Committee and staff comments.
I'll open it up to staff if there are any comments. And seeing none, to my fellow committee members. Any comments? I will just say thank you again for the work that went into preparing for this particular meeting, and also the perspective of how management uses these findings and leverages them to continuously improve efficient and effective outcomes for the residents of Glendale. I do appreciate that. Let's move on to, and just one more thing. I couldn't help but think about, you know, what was going on in terms of the in terms of all of this AI stuff that's being introduced and how it might impact not only, you know, the audit function that we oversee, but also just the city as a whole and departments as a whole. If you know, whether the city is considering what the impacts and potential benefits of leveraging, you know, these types of powerful tools might be in terms of the governance of the city and carrying out the operations. I'm sure that's something that is being thought of and considered, but I do want to mention that I think that we're at kind of an inflection point with the introduction of these new technologies, and that it's very similar to, say, when, you know, the internet came online and we started getting access to information and being able to communicate. I have a suspicion that we're at a similar kind of point with this AI in those nascent days. So something to think about, and I'm sure we'll see more as this year progresses and in the coming years. But I think it is definitely something that city staff, both on the department level and from the management level, should look into leveraging in order to, you know, make certain activities more efficient because it's a powerful tool. Okay, let's move on to the next item.
Item number 8, new business.
Seeing no new business, the next item, please.
Item number 9, adjournment.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
I second.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much.